Well, welcome back to Mr. Foreman's workshop, where things are moving along at a blistering pace, provided your concept of time is similar to that of a very old tree or a mountainous orogeny. We're ready to start putting things back together, pressing in the main shaft, so I find it prudent about now that we're going to install the rear seal. We'll start off by getting a little goop on the outside of the seal. Make sure it seals, that's what we want. Leave that for a few minutes. I certainly do not have a perfect record when it comes to putting seals in and having them not distort. I may have mentioned I'm not good at pressing in seals. That went in surprisingly straight. That's good. Our final preparations for getting the main shaft into the box. We need to protect the inner race of the bearing it's going to press through. And to help with that, we're going to use our brand new oil seal land with its oil thrower pressed on. It went a little wonky when I put it on, but you get that on the big jobs. Anyway, we need to give this a good oil up and also the oil seal. The only extra component for the main shaft we have to concern ourselves with for now is first gear. With its selector groove here, some dog clutch teeth there, that's going to face second gear. Now it's a heavy gear and it can easily fall off the splines. And who knows what damage it can do rattling around on the bottom of the box. So we're going to lower it in first and then put the shaft through and send it to the press. And we just got to make sure that it's splined on, because otherwise we'll be doing some damage with the press. Lay it down there. Get our oil seal land. Alright. And we'll make sure our press is set up. To get our supports ready, we have a whole pile of nicks and knacks. We have a shackle. It's a shackle. Put that down there. And we have our hub nut wrench. We have a distance piece off the bloody, what are those, half shafts at the front. It's going to sit there. And then we have our original, oil seal land that's going to butt up to the new one. And so that will allow the main shaft to go down and join with the new oil seal land to support the inner race of the bearing as we put the weight on it. Goes in there. Twist that around so we can see what's going on. Everything's got to be lined up. Tentatively begin. Oh, I see the problem. It's pushing against the ground, so it's pushing the press up. It's not anchored on it. Oh, shit. That means we won't have enough room. We won't. Let me think. A new strategy. You can see under there. Okay. So let's go gently in and see what happens. All right. Seems to be working. That might be it. That might be it. Just to ensure that our main shaft isn't going to do anything unpredictable, we'll install all the back bits, such as our brand new output gears. In the layouts, both in the Haynes manual for the Series 2s, 3s and the Green Bible for the Series 1, they do not show this little shim washer right here, except for one little extract further on in the Gearbox section of the Haynes manual does show that it's meant to be there, and I believe it is, so on it goes. Our locker and our castellated nut, which we'll just do up finger tight for now, and then we'll install the gearbox back into its makeshift mount. Now to install the lay shaft minus everything north of third gear. Let's fill our race with oil. Make sure our bearing is well oiled. First gear, lower ends of the shaft and gears, but not the top just yet. We don't want to drop it. Remember that reverse gear is better up out of the way, but but instead of the socket trick, we might be able to just use the hook like that and lever it up. And now let's lower this in. Can be a little tricky, so we're going to have to be patient. Well, that's good. Now it's almost impossible to see in there, but it does appear that the gears are lining up, so that's promising. Now we have a brand new synchro clutch unit here getting an oil bath, and unfortunately I declared the original good to go, but on closer inspection I'd missed some badly damaged little splines, and I think that's a sign of living in denial as an older gentleman, and my close range viewing is starting to fade. I really do have to accept reality, buck up and get a better pair of glasses. But nevertheless, I caught it in time, and here we have it ready to be installed. Now remember, there's a recessed section in here on one side that goes downhill facing third gear. On the other side, no recess. That heads up towards the bell housing. Let's pop this on. Now we have our oil-soaked needle roller bearing, and that lives on top of the main shaft. It's going to nose into the back of the primary pinion. The sleeve for our lay shaft, and then we've got to grease up and prepare for the gasket. So that's what we'll do. Grease around this face. Alright, how is that going to go on? Looks like that way. Now with our gasket in place, grease the other side, just gently. No need to get too excited. So you will notice that I've not installed the constant gear onto the lay shaft. Now if you're an individual that's able to connect the bell housing to the gearbox with that in position, then you should be in the high stakes heist business like the Mission Impossible stuff and go by the title Master Wizard. And also if your gearbox is in a horizontal position and you can connect the two without damaging your gasket, then you too should be called Sorcerer or Warlock. But I possess none of these abilities, so I'm going to go with what I think might be a slightly easier method for the mere mortal. I'm going to grab my constant gear, distance piece and washer, put them into position like that under the primary pinion. And I'm going to use this random bolt, come in from the front, just to keep everything in line. And now it's time to offer up the bell housing. The big trick at this point is to get the constant gear splined onto the lay shaft, and that takes a thing called patience. This can take anywhere from 30 seconds to half the day. I am using the original pinch bolts, and just to ensure that they don't come loose, I'm going to add a little Loctite to everybody on the threads. Nice. So as you know, the way the main shaft butts into the primary pinion does allow a little bit of tolerance for things not to be exact. So provided that you got your lay shaft distance piece measurements correct, there should be no reason why you don't have a nice smooth turn from your primary pinion. Now if by chance that things are locked up, the only thing I could really think of is that maybe you haven't hammered your main shaft deep enough down into the box. But otherwise, you should be good to go. Let us lock in our lay shaft. Now we still have 3 nuts to contend with. 2 on the main shaft, 1 on the lay shaft, 2 of which have torque settings. We're going to need to lock the shaft, so this is a good opportunity to install our selector forks. Now I changed the seals on these selectors, so I had to take the fork off and then take some fine grained emery cloth and just scrape away the scunge and grit. I also saw no harm in greasing the shaft and also the little divots where they live. We are going to be working, as you remember, from left to right, starting with third and fourth gear. So what we're going to do with our synchro clutch, and mine's extremely tight in the box, is lock it into third. Okay, now you remember where the third and fourth gear selector fork lives, right on that little synchro clutch. And we have good accessibility. Lower it in and make sure our seal sits in place. So now with our third and fourth in neutral, we're going to take our little hook and we're going to grab first gear and pull it forward as far as it will go. That will give us accessibility. And now, coming in from a slight angle off to the right, we're going to attempt to fish it into where it lives, into that selector groove. Once we reckon we've got it, we'll lower it in. Now with that one in place, we want to throw it back into first gear and get that cog as far to the back of the box as possible and out of the way. With our hook, we grab reverse gears and pull them as far forward as they will go. And now we have our last selector shaft. New springs on the gate. And we're going to come in at a 90-degree angle and gently make a turn. And we're trying to get that fork to slot in between the two cogs. So now we have all these three in the box. You're going to be able to tell if they're all in line by here, through where the gear shifter will move them. So if they're a little bit askew or cattywampus, then you might have to loosen off the forks and move them around a little bit. Okay, we're going to select two gears at once. So we're not going to install our detent springs and balls, but we're going to put our cap on temporarily. So we're going to want fourth, and I think second. Let's try second. Solid. I might have lied a little bit about the torque settings. It said nothing in the green book, and the Haynes manual for a Series 2, which is pretty much the same gearbox, says 75 foot-pounds for the lay shaft nut, but nothing for anything else. The tools we have: 7/16 socket on the torque wrench, and then we have a special tool from H&J Engineering that I bought in the UK. Found them on eBay, contacted them directly and purchased this. It was one of the cheaper options, but I just dropped it on the ground and it broke off one of the teeth. Okay, so keep that in mind. You might just want to stick to the hammer and the punch. And for the back, we have this contraption here. All right, yeah, look at that. 32mm socket, cunningly modified for the job at hand. And in the brand new edition of the Oxford Dictionary, you're going to find alongside words dodgy and imprecise, photograph of this. Okay, that's for the rear nut. Okay, and now into the back. Not fitting too well. I see no reason why we shouldn't install our detent balls and springs. Now these objects not only stop you from selecting two gears at once, but their primary purpose will be to keep you in gear that you've selected. Now as for the other three, to avoid any risk of dropping them inside the gearbox we've worked so hard at putting back together, we're going to install them from the outside in, which means we're going to replace our cover plate, hopefully for the last time, using a smear of grease as a gasket. Well, we have here 3 ball bearings, 3 springs, 2 grommets. The reverse spring is the chunkier of the three. Alright, we're going to insert our ball bearing into the little hole, and then the spring. And our little grommet in there. Now we grab our cap, and this can be a little tricky. Alright, in theory, the other one should be a bit easier. Smaller spring, see. Alright, our third one is going to live on top here. Chuck some oil in. A little cork gasket, we can't buy these new anymore. Cap. Spring. Dipstick. Living inside this little cap is a lock stop for second gear that needs to be checked and adjusted. So we bash it into second gear, and then using whatever wrench will fit, we adjust this stop bolt so it's within 0.002 of an inch clearance. So living inside the gearbox and sealing the front of it is our clutch fork housing. We have the fork in here, and we have a little shaft that pushes forward to drive that out to depress your clutch. And inside we have our clutch throwout bearing. And then just here in the middle, some sort of a bush. So let's take this unit apart. We'll start by doing these bolts on this outer plate. Plate comes off, little piece of a gasket there. Okay, now the shaft. The shaft pretty much slides out, but it might need an application of force to encourage it. Alright, where's my punch? Okay, here we have the shaft. It might be that yours very much resists the urge to relieve itself of its duties, and some of the reasons for that might be that if you remember that there's a pin goes through there with an adapter on it, and my pin came out in 3 pieces. So it has a twisting motion, of course, to drive that fork, and I believe there can be some burring and possibly even distortion on well-worn units. So you might need to get a metal file and apply that to the edge so that you can clean it up and allow it to punch through. With our shaft out of the way, we can now remove the fork, but be ready for things to explode. There's a spring in there. Alright, there we go. So we have the fork, a spring, and a washer. So on the end here we have a dust cover, and inside we have an oil seal. So we're going to have to tap off the dust cover and then try and get at those components to replace them. So we have our clutch depressor here that slides in and out, and that's pressed into the clutch throwout bearing. And we're going to need to press the sleeve out from the bearing while it's in the housing. The new bush installed, you'd expect it's time that we pressed our sleeve into the bearing. Now I did test fit the sleeve into this new bush beforehand, but now it's installed, for love nor money does it want to go in there. So I think we might have to grab some sandpaper and see if we can ream it out a little. Entice it to fit. Got to goop up the sides of our oil seal to help it seal, and then we've got to install it and hopefully not bugger it up. Once we have that in there, then we put on our dust cover. We're about ready to install our fork, our new spring and our washer. First of all, we need to inspect the shaft, which for most part is in pretty good condition, but we do know there's a bit of wear on the end. But also let's examine where the oil seal runs. You can see that that is not good. These, unfortunately, are quite expensive units to purchase. And voila, here we have the new one. Alright, let's not be shy about the oil. Some on the oil seal. Inside the fork. And we need to squeeze and cram. Alright. Now for our greasy shaft. There it's in. Didn't expect it to happen that easy. That would put up a bit more of a fight. Okay. Let's give our bearing an oil up. And then lastly, we have a cover plate and a gasket. Once again, we're using the original pinch bolts. So I've got some spring washers and also Loctite. Try to prevent anything from falling off that'll be very difficult to reach again. The gear shifter. We're about to dismantle and reassemble this thing. So the first thing we might want to do is to remove our locating peg or bolt, whatever you want to call that, before we put our unit into the vise. And then we have to overcome the challenges of another circlip. But once we get that out, things are ready to explode. We have here a circlip, a washer, a spring, and some sort of a seat. At this point, the little housing just should slip over the gear shifter, but as mine did first time around, I believe there's some burring in there that had to be cleaned up. Otherwise, it was just getting stuck, and it was a mission. So as you can see here, I've gone completely off the rails and purchased myself a whole new selection of internals that I'm going to replace. And even though this is an exposed unit and could attract grime and grit, I am going to lash out and do a little bit of greasing. Just a little bit of greasing around the ball and the seat and the housing, because that's just what I like to do. So now that we have all that done, we have to line up our groove here with the bolt hole on the housing. Slot it on over, and now we get our components in order and send it to the vise. Alright, here we go. Our greasy little seat goes in first. Sits in there. Then we've got our big powerful spring and our washer and our circlip. It's at this point things get a little exciting. Push that all on there and seal it up, which is much easier said than done, especially with a brand new circlip. Oh, see what happens? That sounds promising. I think we've done it. Right. Now, although I'd like to install this now just for the look of it and the feeling of getting close to completion. I'm going to wait, because whenever we get the engine sorted out and the transmission's ready to go in, then this is going to get in the way. So into storage it'll go. Well, with the gearbox as good as done, there's no secret that the excitement levels are through the roof. This will be a good time for us to take a break, catch a breath, regroup, and I'll see you in the next episode when we put together the transfer box.